Have you ever wondered about the forces that brought together the United Nations, a global organization that now encompasses 193 member states? Picture a world emerging from the ashes of a devastating war, nations grappling with the demand for peace and unity. How did these forces converge to birth this world body? It's a fascinating story of diplomacy, conflict resolution, and the pursuit of global peace. Let's dive in. To understand the birth of the United Nations, we must first look at the world before its formation. In the early 20th century, the world was a vastly different place. The scars of the Great War, now known as the First World War, were still fresh. This conflict, which had raged from 1914 to 1918, left unimaginable devastation in its wake. It was a war unlike any that had been seen before, marking the first major use of chemical weapons and leading to the death of over 16 million people. The world was shaken to its core. In the aftermath of this unprecedented destruction, the League of Nations was born. Conceived with the noble aim of preventing such a catastrophic war from ever happening again, this international organization was the first of its kind. It was an attempt to bring the nations of the world together in dialogue rather than conflict. However, the League of Nations was not without its flaws. It lacked the necessary authority to enforce its decisions and was unable to prevent the aggressive actions of some states. This lack of power was a significant factor leading to the rise of fascism and the tensions that would eventually explode into the Second World War. As the 1930s drew to a close, the world was once again on the precipice of major conflict. The League of Nations had failed to maintain peace, and the world had spiraled into a state of chaos and tension. The failures of the League of Nations were starkly apparent, and the hope of a peaceful global community seemed to be slipping away. Yet, in the face of these daunting challenges, the idea of global cooperation remained. The lessons learned from the League of Nations' shortcomings were not forgotten. Instead, they served as a powerful motivator for the creation of a new, stronger, and more effective international organization. As the world stood on the brink of another devastating war, the need for a global peacekeeping organization was more apparent than ever. The idea of the United Nations was born out of necessity during the darkest days of World War II. In the midst of a global conflict that was ravaging continents and decimating populations, a beacon of hope began to flicker. The year was 1941, a time of unprecedented destruction and despair. Yet in this darkness, the seeds of an idea for global peace and unity were sown. It was in the Atlantic, aboard the naval ship HMS Prince of Wales, where U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill met. The result of this meeting was the Atlantic Charter, an 8-point blueprint for a post-war world. The charter was a bold proclamation of freedom, peace, and global cooperation, a vision that would echo through the decades to come. Fast forward to January of 1942. Representatives from 26 nations gathered in Washington, D.C. to sign the Declaration by United Nations. This pledge of mutual support and cooperation marked the first official use of the term United Nations, a name symbolizing the collective resolve of the world's free nations to stand together against the forces of tyranny and aggression. The idea of the United Nations began to take shape in earnest during a series of planning meetings known as the Dumbarton Oaks Conference in 1944. Delegates from the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and China deliberated on a structure that would promote international peace and prevent future wars. They discussed issues such as voting procedures, the role of the Security Council, and the establishment of a General Assembly. These conversations laid the foundation for what was to become the United Nations Charter. The war was far from over, but already leaders were laying the groundwork for a new era of global cooperation. These planning stages, driven by the urgent need to prevent further global conflict, were the birthplace of an idea that would forever change the course of human history. And so, the United Nations, the embodiment of global unity and cooperation, was conceived in the crucible of World War II. In April 1945, delegates from 50 nations gathered in San Francisco, tasked with the monumental job of drafting the United Nations Charter. This was no ordinary conference. It was a global gathering of minds and spirits, united by a shared goal of creating a world of peace after the devastation of World War II. As the delegates convened, the air was heavy with responsibility. The task at hand was to draft a charter, a blueprint for international cooperation and peace. This was not just a document, it was to be a roadmap for a new world order, a guide to prevent the atrocities of war from ever happening again. The drafting process was a mammoth task. The delegates were not just creating a document, they were laying the foundation of an entity that would stand as a guardian of peace and human rights. Every word, every sentence, every clause was debated, discussed, and dissected, ensuring that the charter reflected the collective aspirations of nations. The conference was a melting pot of ideas and ideologies, a testament to the shared commitment to peace. Discussions revolved around key principles, such as the sovereign equality of all its members, the non-use of force in settling disputes, and the responsibility of nations to uphold these principles in the larger interest of world peace. The Charter also outlined the structure and functions of the United Nations. It established the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, the International Court of Justice, and the Secretariat. Each organ was designed to fulfill specific functions, but all were united in their commitment to maintain international peace and security. The delegates also outlined ambitious goals for the United Nations. These included maintaining international peace and security, promoting social progress and better standards of life, strengthening international law, and promoting human rights. After 2 months of intense deliberations and discussions, the Charter was ready. On June 26, 1945, the United Nations Charter was signed, a beacon of hope in a world weary from war. This marked the birth of the United Nations, an institution built on the ruins of war with the hope of a peaceful and prosperous future. With the Charter signed, the United Nations officially came into being on October 24, 1945. This was the starting point of a new era in international cooperation and diplomacy. A beacon of hope was lit in a world still reeling from the aftermath of the Second World War. The first years of the United Nations were marked by fervor and enthusiasm. 51 countries, representing over 2/3 of the world's population, gathered for the first session of the UN General Assembly in London in January 1946. The eyes of the world were on them, waiting to see this grand experiment in action. And indeed, the United Nations did not disappoint. The organization quickly sprang into action, tackling a host of global issues. In its first year alone, it addressed the problem of atomic energy and established the Atomic Energy Commission. It also created the United Nations Children's Fund, better known as UNICEF, to provide emergency food and health care to children and mothers in countries devastated by the war. The United Nations also took on the mammoth task of decolonization, promoting the principle of self-determination. It oversaw the transition of more than 80 territories from colonial rule to independence, reshaping the world map in the process. The organization's role in peacekeeping has been one of its most visible. It has deployed peacekeeping missions to conflict zones around the world, from the Middle East to Africa and Asia, often serving as the last line of defense between warring factions. Yet, the United Nations is not just about resolving conflicts and responding to crises. It has been instrumental in setting global standards and norms, from human rights to environmental protection. It has played a key role in eradicating diseases, promoting gender equality, and combating climate change. Over 7 decades later, the United Nations continues to work towards its founding goals, to maintain international peace and security, promote social progress, and better standards of life in larger freedom. This is the United Nations in action, a testament to our collective will and capacity to shape a better, more peaceful world. From its inception amidst the chaos of World War II, the United Nations has evolved into an indispensable part of our global community. The UN was born out of necessity, a response to the horrors of a world at war. But it was more than just a reaction. It was a bold, visionary idea, conceived by leaders who dared to imagine a world where nations could resolve their differences peacefully, where justice would be upheld and human rights protected. The San Francisco Conference, where 50 nations gathered, marked a pivotal moment in history. It was here that the United Nations Charter was signed, setting in motion a new era of international cooperation. And the United Nations has not been a silent spectator. It has taken action time and again, intervening in conflicts, providing humanitarian aid, protecting human rights, promoting social and economic development, and working towards environmental sustainability. But let's not forget the challenges. The United Nations, like any other institution, has faced its fair share of trials. Yet it continues to strive, to adapt, to evolve, to serve the world community. The story of the United Nations is not just a tale of its formation, it's an ongoing narrative of nations, leaders, and individuals working together, striving for a world that is more just, more peaceful, and more sustainable. It's a powerful reminder of what can be achieved when nations choose to work together for the common good.